right. Hi, everyone. I'm back. So for our final session today, we are going to have another panel discussion, this time with three esteemed speakers about sustainable sourcing, a topic that has only grown in its importance to green coffee buyers and sellers over the past decade as it's moved from the fringes of the coffee industry into the mainstream. I'll take a moment to introduce our panel, and then I'll hand it over to them. So Stephanie Daniels is the Senior Program Director for the Sustainable Food Lab's Agriculture and Development work. Her expertise is in responsible sourcing with a focus on the impact of sourcing in cocoa and coffee growing communities. She has dedicated her knowledge and energy to creating equitable food systems that harness the power of trade to deliver positive social, socioeconomic, and environmental outcomes. Welcome, Stephanie. Next, we have José Rivera, who is an SCA Sustainability Award winner in the individual category in 2023, the Director of Sourcing at Origin Coffee Lab, where he creates effective and innovative strategies to add value to the coffee supply chain. Through a focus on increasing producers' profit margins, leveraged by comprehensive farmer training, José is able to help coffee communities he grew up in and make truly lasting changes. Welcome, José. And then finally, Michael Sheridan, also an SCA Sustainability Award winner in the individual category, but in 2021. Michael's been working to make coffee better since 2004. From 2004 to 2016, he led coffee programming at the International Development Agency, CRS. From 2016 until just a few days ago, he led green coffee buying for Intelligentsia Coffee, and in a few days, he'll be starting the next chapter of his career as the CEO of the Coffee Quality Institute. Thank you three so much for being here, and please take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kim. And can you hear me? Just wanted to check. Okay, great. Well, it's really a pleasure to be here today. I wish we were all in the same room drinking good coffee together, but we'll take these virtual rooms for what they are and the gift that to connect with people all around the world. So again, as Kim Elena said, I'm Stephanie Daniels. I'm actually going to be the moderator of the panel. José and Michael are your stars today. And what we're talking about is value in sourcing systems. Today, I want to just give you a little bit of framing. And from where I sit, I am not a coffee expert, although I'm a coffee lover. And when I look at the coffee sector, I see one of the few places where there is much potential to grow and lots of innovation and good things to learn from. So lots of challenges, of course, but also lots to learn from. So my organization, Sustainable Food Lab, we focus on shifting the dynamics of the mainstream and commodity markets. And over the last few years, I've been focusing on the concept of embedding living income as a minimum metric for companies' sustainability programs, with this basic assumption that if a product like coffee is called sustainable, then farmers should be able to at least earn a decent standard of living. As part of that work, I have the privilege of working with the Sustainable Coffee Challenge and the ICO on setting some or supporting initiatives to get comparable and publicly available data for companies to use in terms of the cost of decent standard of living, the reference cost of sustainable production, and other critical data. So that system is, I think, starting on a sector level. And hopefully what we're hoping with that work is that it leads into national dialogues. It has in about 9 countries started with quite promising momentum. And there's a real need for the public and private sector to work together. But I think as we look at those big systems and the need for national and sector-wide dialogue, that is really fed by the sourcing practices between particular supply chain partners. And that's what we're going to focus on today, is that we need sort of structural solutions and that kind of thing. But a lot of these challenges can be addressed by individual actions and company practices. And I think we have some inspiration to learn from the two organizations today. I just had a chance to listen to one of the previous sessions, and Luis Samper was talking a little bit about how different value chains are governed. And he made this reference to relational governance, where there is sort of mutual dependency between buyers and sellers, and that in those kind of value chains, there's really fertile ground for innovation and advance in understanding of the coffee traded. So I think that, to me, speaks a lot about what our two speakers are going to address today. So I'm going to turn it over to the two of you. Michael, I'd like to go to you first. You're in an interesting time when you're starting to go from one job to another job. So I imagine that gives you some time for reflection, but maybe staying in your Intelligentsia role, this conversation today, tell us a little bit about how you think about this challenge of sustainable sourcing. I know you have some slides to share, and then we can come back to the audience with questions after that. So I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here, especially with you, Stephanie. We've worked together in the past on some of the challenges you mentioned, and with Jose, I will try to keep the time frame straight. As Kim said, I spent 7+ years as the Director of Sourcing and Shared Value at Intelligentsia, and I was in that role until last Friday, so it's still pretty top of mind. But during the 7 years I spent at Intelligentsia, I had the privilege and pleasure of working closely with Jose. His organization, Origin Coffee Lab, is one of the most successful new relationships that we built over the past 7 years at Intelligentsia. So I feel very comfortable in this conversation in this company. Am I supposed to be seeing slides now?
I don't know. I'm assuming someone. There we go.
There we go. Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much. Okay, so I just I'm going to put up some ideas here that are fed by that are really informed by both my 7+ years at Intelligentsia and the previous decade or more that I was at Catholic Relief Services, leading programs with smallholder farmers, mostly in Central and South America. And really, the opportunity to speak on this topic of sustainable sourcing strategies and value models was really welcome opportunity, because I've spent most of my 20 years in coffee thinking about and working on them. As is mentioned, the past 7 years, I directed sourcing for Intelligentsia, and every day that I went to that office, I had to walk past this, which is a garage at the brewery at the Goose Island Beer Company, which is Intelligentsia's neighbor, just west of the Loop in Chicago. And I loved that this was the last thing I saw before I sat down at my desk to work, because it really speaks to what animated me in that work. And I actually showed this to a gathering of growers at our Global Direct Trade Network event, Extraordinary Coffee Workshop. And I said, we don't want to be your only coffee buyer. We just want to be your best coffee buyer. And for me, what that really meant as a person leading green coffee buying was always and everywhere looking for opportunities to add value, to create value for our suppliers. And I think so the perspectives I'm going to offer today are really based on the experience of sitting with growers, trying to map their path into the market, looking downstream toward the market, and then being a buyer looking upstream all the way to Origin, and trying to keep present everything I learned during those many years I worked at Origin. And the first thing I'll say is that I think when we talk about value creation, there's an impulse to think about doing more good, right? We want to create more value. That means we want to do more good. And in coffee, there's been a lot of dialogue around green coffee prices and doing more good. And there's been the idea that value is financial value, and we need to create financial value. And the most natural way to do that is to pay higher prices. And that is certainly a really important part of any sustainability strategy. But I think there was a period, thankfully, I think we're receding from it, but I do think it's still a little bit operative, this idea of really focusing on the highest prices paid for the highest quality coffees. Those eye-popping numbers that are commended at auction, the $100+ per pound winning lots. And so there's this idea, and it becomes a kind of a what I think of as a sort of a beauty pageant approach to value creation. The more coffee you pay, the higher your price, the more sustainable your supply chain. And I think, again, high prices are important. Those auctions are important, but you can create a lot of value without paying $100+ for top lots at COEs. And in that discussion about doing more good, I think the question that gets asked probably not enough is how do we do less harm? And this is not just an issue for the coffee market; it's an issue for the broader global economy that coffee is a part of. And it was reflected really powerfully in a best-selling book a couple of years ago called Winners Take All, that really talked about the impulse of the world's leading corporations in the social and environmental impact spaces, taking the same approach that they take to succeed in the market, which is trying to outdo one another and to compete with one another to do the most good. And the author's compelling suggestion is that we don't ask frequently enough, how do we do less harm? And it's an important reminder that risk and reward are two sides of the same coin. And that while we spend a lot of time talking about more reward, the flip side of that coin, risk, is also an equally valid way to think about value creation. So I just want to offer a few thoughts today about thinking about value creation in ways that maybe we haven't historically as an industry, or that are focused on doing the most good and paying the highest prices for the best quality lots, kind of obscure. That's supposed to say price risk. So I think a lot about risk. I thought about it a lot when I was working with growers, and I thought about it a lot when I was working as a buyer with growers. And I really think about 4 categories of risk that are a challenge to the sustainable coffee trade: price risk, market risk, climate risk, and currency or exchange rate risk. And I think the way we buy coffees, to Stephanie's earlier point, individual actions and corporate practices can go a long way in mitigating all 4 of those categories of risk. And the first one I want to talk about is price risk. So price is important, but I would encourage folks to think less about the highest prices paid and that sort of beauty pageant approach to pricing, and to think more about weighted average prices. Ultimately, what we're trying to solve for is not breaking the record at the last auction. What we're trying to solve for is this. You've all seen some version of this graph. This is 40 years of daily closes on the C market. And the 2 things that should jump out to everybody are, first, the really wild volatility of that market as a price discovery mechanism, and then the long, painful periods it spends well below costs of production. My own start in coffee came in that deep trough that most of you know very well. Anybody who's my age or older, from 99 to 2004, when we spent 5 years, more than 5 years below $1 a pound. This is what we're solving for, is making sure that prices are high enough and stable enough for people to be able to extend their time horizons and plan for the future. And paying $264 a pound is amazing for everybody involved, but that doesn't really address this issue. And so I would encourage folks to think about weighted average prices. You may not ever even participate in a COE or ever pay more than $5 or $10 a pound for your best coffees. You may be buying bulk lots of blenders, but if you're paying stable prices that are high enough, you can have a very sustainable supply chain and contribute in really important ways to the goal Stephanie mentioned of having a living income. Market risk is a little different, and it's related to price risk, but market risk is the risk that nobody's buying what you're selling, that there isn't a demand for your supply. And that comes when your offer isn't aligned with the specific trends in the marketplace. I often think of the coffee trade as a really complicated version of the salon game telephone that's played across time zones, across borders, across languages, across cultures, across different ways of knowing, across different frameworks of value and meaning. It's incredibly complex what we do. And we as buyers can mitigate some of the risk associated with that game. And again, the market risk that in all of those in all of those communications, that the signals that the market is sending are obscured, and there's too much noise for people to perceive the signals. For me, the role of a buyer is to amplify the signal and suppress the noise. And this is exactly the point that Luis Fernando raised around supply chain governance or supply stream governance, and having clear rules of engagement and, as much as possible, clear communication from the market end of the chain to the supply end. And for me, this is another area where price has, unfortunately for all of us, really dominated the discussion about supply chain transparency. A lot of times in coffee, it's hard to see the word transparency when it's not preceded by price. And price transparency is hugely important. I worked very closely with the folks at Emory during the years I was at Intelligentsia on data donations and financial donations to support that important work. But transparency, supply chain transparency, and supply chain governance really go so far beyond price. In my experience, the best examples of this are really, it really comes from a point of departure of true partnership. And you're saying, the old model of coffee was to make money off of your partners and to get margin by squeezing people upstream in your own supply chain. And the modern view of the market is that you compete together with your partners against other supply chains. And so you want your own interest is aligned with your supplier's interest because you want them to be as successful as you are. And so what does this look like? Playing this game of telephone in a way that suppresses noise and amplifies the signal. It's being transparent about everything. What are you seeing in the marketplace? What are the opportunities? What are the constraints? What are the doors that are opening? What are the doors that have been open that are about to close? And then, really originizing those communications and grounding them for people. So what does that mean for you? This is the quality that we're looking for. And so calibration around quality and understanding what quality is, having a common language for it and a common framework for it. There are a lot of approaches to that. The Q is the most well-known, but even outside the Q, that function of calibration around quality is so fundamental, and communicating as clearly as possible what the targets are. What are the specific ways that coffee is being used? Is it being produced as offered as a single origin or a blend? How is it being roasted? All of those things position growers to be able to respond more successfully to the demands of the market. And every one of the bits of knowledge that's transferred or technology that's transferred through that kind of communication reduces the market risk. It's hugely important. And it doesn't get any sort of play in conversations about high prices, but it's really important in my experience to the success of growers and then ultimately to the success of their supply chain partners further downstream. Sharing the risks of innovation. For me, this is so important. And there's still like ghastly stories about the way buyers behave at origin in terms of what they ask suppliers or growers to do in terms of bearing the risks of innovation. In most cases, growers and certainly smallholder growers are the least equipped to bear those risks. But to me, there are good practices here. And I just, there's a story that I could tell about our work with José, but this is a picture from a farm. That's me in the upper right there participating in the post-harvest cherry sorting. This was a lot that Intelligentsia purchased from a longtime partner in Central America. We participated in the cherry sorting, and then we went to the mill with the coffee. And as the coffee's being milled, we're having a conversation about fermentation protocols and fermentation times. And we talk about mutual interest in exploring, pushing the outer bound on fermentation time and seeing what the impact is on the cup profile. And in that conversation, I offered to buy the coffee. I said, if you extend the fermentation time to this other parameter that we've been discussing, we'll guarantee you'll buy this lot. It was just a few bags of outturn. And everybody on the spot said, yeah, absolutely, let's do that. If I had told him, hey, would you try that and send me an offer? It might have been a different conversation because they would have been exposing themselves to the risk of that innovation. If that experiment went wrong and I walked away from the lot, they would have ruined a lot of perfectly good premium worthy coffee. And that's just one small sort of top of mind example of how risks can be shared, risks of innovation can be shared. But there's the pace of innovation is breakneck right now, and there's so much happening. And to the extent that buyers can give some cover to growers, pilot things on a small scale, guarantee a purchase. There's no windfall to be made in the first year for the roaster, but importantly, protecting grower from the risk of loss is a really important incentive for for innovation. And the reward in the first year isn't gain or loss. The reward is learning, and then applying that in out years across a broader and broader volume, so that everybody can benefit. And then just closing a little bit with some reflections on relationships. Committing for the long term is probably, in my experience, the most important ingredient in a recipe for value creation. This is an analogy that I like a lot in this context. We need more match and less Tinder. And I think it's, there's like this flip kind of reference to Match versus Grindr or Match versus Tinder. And then there's a more robust version of it, which is game theory and repeated games. And the key insight is that your calculation changes depending on how long you think you're going to be engaged with another party. If it's a single transaction, and this is where the Match and Tinder stuff becomes very explicit, but like if it's a single transaction one time, you're going to have a very different calculation than if you're saying, this is a person I'm going to be in a relationship with for a long time. And I'm talking about a trading relationship here. And so I'm going to act in a way that's going to maximize benefits over a longer term of time. And that just opens up so much possibility that's not there if people are looking at things as a one-off transaction. And, I think that kind of long-term relationship reduces the risk of innovation for everybody involved, because a grower who's looking at a possible innovation and investment and the risk associated with innovation is going to look at that very differently if it's in the context of a 5 or 10 or 15-year relationship with somebody who comes back year over year and has demonstrated their interest in paying high and stable prices than if it's someone who's new to me as a grower and whose commitment to me over the long term is uncertain. And then in closing, I'll just say that, climate risk mitigation, which is the biggest risk we face as a species, happens over the long term. And the way you buy coffee can shape our climate outcomes. This is a picture I took on a visit to a farm that supplies Intelligentsia, my first visit, and I was getting a tour of the farm. This grower for 30 years has been converting degraded pasture lands into coffee-based agroforestry systems over a 10-year plan that begins with planting shade trees. Years later, coffee goes in the understory. And in a period of 10 to 15 years, they're transforming big swaths of landscape from this into this. So those two pictures are taken, one facing this way, the other one turning around 180 degrees and facing backward. And I would often tell the story when I was talking about the direct trade program and long-term commitments at Intelligentsia, and people would kind of scratch their heads like, well, Intelligentsia didn't do any of that work. You guys weren't planting any trees. But the reality is that the trading model and the stability created by the trading model that included fixed prices, long-term commitment, shared approaches to innovation in the name of quality. This farm has since 2004 sold all of its volume to Intelligentsia and Stumptown, which takes which two companies that take a very similar approach. And the commercial context they were operating in extended their time horizons, provided stable income, allowed them to be able to look at multi-year investment that would generate returns over multiple years because of the kind of trading system and trading relationship they were in. And so in that sense, a long-term trading relationship, a lot of the things that we're talking about in terms of climate risk mitigation are really hard to talk about in the absence of a long-term commitment to growers, because as they're working on the kinds of practices that will mitigate the impacts of climate change on their systems and on our planet, they need to be assured of the economic returns to their investments. So I'm going to close there. I really look forward to hearing what José has to say and the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. As always, really insightful. And I love the analogy of that this is a long-term sort of marriage in some ways, and that the things that you can do when you spend the time getting to know each other, really being partners, also this point of to be able to innovate takes trust, investment. So not only in, technical assistance and that kind of thing, but sharing the risk of it. I think it's really exciting. And now I want to hand it over to you, José, and really hear your thoughts of how Origin Coffee Lab thinks about some of the risks that Michael talked about: market risk, price risk, climate, currency. And how do you think about sustainable sourcing and developing relationships over the long term. And I think they will share your slides for you.
Okay, slides.
So who's ever controlling the slides, Jose has another deck. Yeah.
I think, yeah, here they are. So, wow, Michael, everything was like exactly on the point. Like, I'm going to talk a little bit like with me and OCL, just to tell you guys how we started and when the idea comes from. So, well, I indeed come from a coffee family and a coffee land, but I ended in coffee really a bit by chance, like as a decision of my parents. Like they saw that I no longer had a gift for studies. Some people like are very good at studying. I was pretty unremarkable. Like the circumstances of life mean that I ended up loving what I do now and coffee with everything that it entailed to coffee. Like at first, I was quite reluctant and disoriented until I was very lucky to find people who were very passionate about this work. And they managed to transmit at some point that passion to me. Hello, everyone. My name is José Rivera, and I am the Director of Sourcing of Origin Coffee Lab in Peru. In the end, I think no matter like how much experience one has, no matter how many miles one has traveled, like we never stop being from where we were born. Uh, Nostalgia comes from there and is the root of what made us like at some point the happiest kids in the world. Like for me, my homeland, Jaén and San Ignacio, in the Cajamarca region in the north of Peru, is ingrained to my DNA. And I believe that it is one of the most beautiful things that I can contribute to the plurality of the world that is becoming increasingly narrow, which managed to equate so many ideas and ways of thinking. Like, I think also you need to understand because this is a creative process. The creative process at Origin Coffee Lab responds to a very basic elementary thing, which I think is the ability to dream about things that do not exist. Like in the case of the supply chain, like equity. And in my side of the supply chain, I will say supply chain because for us is not yet appropriate to call it a value chain yet. As we have evolved and made more complex coffee industry and asked a lot of committed questions, we have realized that the location have changed. Like there are not only physical things like pricing in this case, but there are many other things out there that inspire us. We are challenged by the intellectual and field challenge that walk to an unknown horizon. Like in this case, and the horizon shows us some of the root problems in our coffee producing communities. Like the first one is the education. Like most of the coffee producers in my region, like barely finish elementary school. And we're asking these people to manage expenses and investments in their farms, which are like their own small companies. So the second one is the identity, who they are and where these people is from is a big issue, at least in the Andes of Peru. Like the lack of a identity, it has a high negative impact on mental health, on people start feel lost. They are aimless, mood swings, lack of purpose, and low self-esteem. They feel ashamed of who they are and what they do on their land. So this happens a lot when green coffee buyers visit the producers. Like the producer cannot talk with them at the same level. They are shy. They are very, very like nervous to talk to a gringo, that as we say around here. Like the third one is the profitability of the farms. Like with a lack of education and poor farm management, no matter what price is being paid, the lack of profitability will be a huge for these coffee plots. And I am taking some words from Michael. Is like we don't need just like a extremely and crazy high price. And then, well, wealth distribution. And I think we don't need to talk too much about this. Like everybody, let's understand this pretty pretty good. And then we have this. Like I think everybody remembers this scene from Toy Story when Woody told Buzz that how he needs to behave, how he needs to react because he is a toy. And then we have this, like, and I know this will sound like very like direct, but most of the times we feel as, and I am talking as a producer, we feel the industry like telling us what to do and how to react to everything. Like there are a lot of relationships that they ask for a lot of information, like media or marketing stuff. And once we send that email, is like bye bye until the next season or the next like samples. So if we look deeper into specialty coffee, with it claims like info and stories trying to resonate with consumers, we find some common themes. One of the most meaningful terms falls under the heading of responsible sourcing. For consumers, there is a common affinity, I think, for stories and messaging that includes like terms environmental friendly or better farming practices or treating the workers fairly. But at some point, it's just a trait of emotion. It's just a product that is the coffee plus emotions, which sells actually really, really good. So I changed a little bit the topic, and I put like not commercial versus specialty. I put a specialty versus a specialty, but I would like to put it in a different perspective, like hunter versus buyer, a coffee hunter versus a coffee buyer. Like how we see this is like a toxic relationships, like coffee hunters and coffee producers. Like certain rosters or customers view green coffee buying as a like just a transaction and not as a relationship. Even they say that is a long-term relationship because they pay crazy good prices. In a transaction, the roster is just concerned with one outcome. In a specialty that is usually cap score, but it can also be the price. Like either way, this mentality, viewing coffee buying as a transaction, is at the center of the specialty coffee problems. There is no understanding of pressures being placed on small shareholders. The coffee is just traded as a means to an end. And in a relationship, the roster understands the pressures that farmers face and tries to find solutions for themselves and the producers. So this is what the group of people that I represent and me don't need from an industry. Like we need to be very, very cautious about talking about price. Everything I remember the last few years that I was assisting to the RICO, and how it is one of the main topics always is the price that we are paying too low for coffee. We are not doing good paying. We need to pay more. We need to pay more. But every year is just we need to pay more. But let's talk about price in a different way. Like paying more for coffee, like we think and we know actually, that is critical if we are going to establish a realistic long-term relationship, but is not enough alone, as Michael said before. So we got to look at the distribution across the value chain. There are a lot of ways to make this more efficient. Again, like going back to the second or third slide, the producers need to be profitable in the market that they belong. So I'm not going to say that the best prices are better if that price doesn't come with a full commitment package. So I'm just not talking here about the buyer, which is going to pay the price. It needs to involve the whole supply chain. It needs to involve the exporter, it needs to involve the importer, the producers, and everything who is in the supply chain. So there is also a lot of craziness about capping and selecting. Like, I'm so glad, actually, as exporter, that different cultures have opposite traditions and preferences. Taking aside defective coffees, probably the final 80+% of the customers will like just a good, sweet, and a bold cup of coffee, like every day. I don't see any sense in rejecting on or letting go coffees just because they score a fraction differently, and a lot of times is like that. Like, we have this other like meme. This presentation is full of memes. Like, and I wanted to say that producers not only produce single origin coffees. Like, well, if we got a Carimore and the Carimore is selected and separated, even if it's an 80 or 82, like, that coffee has 100% right to be called a single origin. Like, but there are a strong preference now for crazy good varieties and processing coffee, which is fine. There are roasters that are in that market, and it's fine. But the industry needs to know that producers have a wide range of different qualities through the whole harvest. And even though most of them are nice traditional varieties, we can't control the weather or any other conditions. Like, we don't have, like, as your roasters, we don't have thermocouples connected to the dryers, not because we don't want to. Like, it's because the lack of access to education and information. And this is where I'm going to talk, like, touch the transparency stuff. It's not just about how much you're paying about coffee. Is the lack of access to education and information, and also producers just don't know about it, and even they also can afford it. Like, and we can call this sustainable sourcing. I don't think that is actually the right way to phrase it. And then, dude, this is like, if they even that doesn't want, like, they don't want the Caturas típicas and Bourbons, like Carimores. Like, have you talked have you thought about, like, what your coffee future is going to be, or how your coffee is going to taste in the future? Like, this is becoming more and more common in the specialty coffee industry. How many times I have been asked, like, oh, this coffee tastes so good, but the shape of the beans look weird. Do you think there is or it has some Carimore on it? And always I just smile and respond, like, of course there is Carimore on it. Even if it's not from a Carimore tree, probably is from a traditional variety that at some point were introgressed somehow with a less attractive variety around because cross pollination, or I don't know. But yeah, definitely Scarimore in your lot. But I seen the industry, like, avoiding or being very, very sensitive about vegetal flavors. And now, like, there is a trend that a lot of these couples are vegetarian or vegans, like, but they don't like veggies in their coffee. Like, even if the coffee tastes so good and has a lot of complexity enzymatic flavors, just a little bit of vegetal flavors that for sure will not be sensed for the final consumer, the coffee is completely rejected. Like, well, the big thing is that climate change is here. And we need to climb higher and higher to keep producing nicer varieties that the industry wants. It's because of rust, it's because of plagues of diseases, because of like the higher you go, the colder it is, and yeah, the less your coffee tree is going to produce. So it doesn't matter how much price you're paying, like it will not cover the fully production cost. Is like France, the same thing happening in wine. Like winemakers are trying to move north to preserve their crops. Like, and now we have this new European Union regulation that was introduced like this year, I think in June, kind of, yeah, in June, to prevent the importation of commodities linked to deforestation. This is an effort to curb like the loss of the forest and land degradation. But I think this is not just Europe. Like I think this is going to become a global regulation in the next like 10 or 15 years. Like we can go higher to keep producing geishas and timber bones. So here is the question again: how will your coffee taste in the future? Like what we need from a relationship. This is a collab. It's a collaboration between OCL and Intelligentsia for the last 5, 6, 7 years, I think, probably. Like how many producers around the world today quite literally produce coffee and then they wait by the side of the road for a buyer to come, can be a coyote or a trader or whoever it is, to come by and buy their coffee. Like this is a question for the whole people who is listening. In what world do we operate our businesses like that? Like we identify the market of our business, then we create a product to satisfy that market, and then we take the product to the market. That's the smartest way to do. Like in this side, producers, they grow coffee because they don't have anything else to do. Like we can go to the most crazy and sophisticated farms in Panama or like Colombia, and who are growing coffee for a destination market. So that they defined probably the year before or 2, 3 years before with a price idea in mind. So they have a value idea in mind that works for the both sides of the equation. So we need a strong commitments. What Michael said was like commit for the long term. We need to know in advance like pricing, like going to get how much producers are going to get paid, because that allow them to plan for the crop. Like fertilization, like as for financing, fertilization doesn't wait. Like picking and processing do not wait as well. And I can mention also some initiatives from some European folks who are willing to pay the coffee that we export in our local currency because they have the tools to manage the risk. Like in all this case, like the information that goes up in the supply chain is not always the same quality of information that comes down. Information, we think that information should flow the same way in the both sides. And this is not like just about like a specialty coffee. It also involves commercial coffee, which I think is more important, like the C market class. Like probably a lot of people here, like and a lot of people in the world, like beside this niche of like specialty coffee, is the main business, coffee with a C plus price to distribute or somehow deliver coffee to the world. Like I feel these people have a very important place in the coffee industry. So we have to be concerned, and I'm talking about the whole industry, about every way that in coffee, or how this coffee is being traded. Like I'm not here to start separating like specialty and commercial, or like you guys know who you are, and if you are commercial or specialty, or if you are that specialty, just get involved and try to understand the dynamics of what's going on the fields, and try to support your whole supply chain, not just your exporter or the trader. The most critical problems are on the fields. We need to stop avoiding this. Like for example, I'm going to take like a small story about Michael. When Michael visited me last year, it was for almost a week. And how many samples we kept? Like probably 4 or 5, just a table in 5 weeks. So we were traveling around with all the producers that produce coffee for Intelligentsia, and we were fully dedicated to understand the social, economic, and environmental dynamics of the fields. So understanding that, I think, is the way to move forward and add value to the supply chain. Like, as again, like farmers need to be profitable in the market they exist. Doesn't matter if it's like specialty or is a micro lot market or is the C market plus. Like everything needs to have a price structure. And thank you.
Thank you. It was really, really wonderful, and to hear both of you as partners sort of echo some of the same messages is really encouraging. I want to dive a little deeper. We have a couple questions. So you've both talked about certain practices that can help build this kind of relationship that will let you stabilize your business, that will let you innovate. And Jose, coming back to what you first said, give you the ability as a business or individual to dream. I think that's actually quite powerful. What do new things come out of? They come out of dreams, and having that kind of relationship. Can you talk a little bit more, give us some more specifics, and maybe even go back to when you were first getting to know each other as businesses? What are some of the first steps you need to take to build that trust? And then maybe as you move into longer term commitment, what maintains that relationship? I don't know which of you want to take that first. Maybe Michael, since Jose has just spoken.
In preparation for this panel discussion, Jose and I spent some time recalling our first meeting, and I think we were set up for success because we went to lunch together and talked for 90 minutes, and there was just total alignment in vision of what coffee is and what it can be. And so I think the point of departure was a pretty deep alignment on essentially the centrality of quality for smallholder systems. Quality being the key to a sustainable future for smallholders who are not going to compete on the basis of productivity with more capital intensive production systems. And from there, I think, applying I would say, a gradual approach to building the relationship commercially, although in the case of Origin, it was fairly accelerated. But I think we crossed some important sort of thresholds together and hit some milestones together. And it was really satisfying. It's really satisfying for me to see how much success Jose and Origin have had in the marketplace, because I feel like Intelligentsia and me being part of that, like we played a role in that. We bought the first lot that Origin exported, and there's some risk there, right? It's a new supplier, it's unknown, and so we usually start small with a single lot for a new supplier, and we did that. And the next year we hit another milestone, the first full container that Origin exported. The year after that, we went to multiple containers, and each of those things represents both sides sort of gradually committing more and more to one another. In a way, again, the relationship analogy is just so good. Like over time, you get a deeper commitment, you take the relationship to another level. But one of the things that I think people maybe don't really think about is Jose was using our contracts to secure credit. and that working capital he used to go out and collect cherry, and then you could roll that over and buy more cherry. And so that becoming creditworthy and accessing credit is such a, the business can just grow, just capitalizing the business in that way. And what that needs is a commitment of a buyer, and a buyer who's willing to put on paper, like, I'm going to buy coffee from this organization at a price not less than this level. And then Jose can literally take that to the bank and secure credit with it. And it helps grow the business. And it just changes the trajectory of development. I mean, and this is me, having facilitated that process on the ground with coffee cooperatives, like that's another sort of milestone or threshold. And you show you're credit worthy, you manage your money well, then you get more money, and you can just grow. And so they've managed that process of growth really well without losing, not losing focus, not losing their focus, but also, using their growth to drive a deeper commitment to better outcomes in the field. So for me, each one of those milestones is important and was really gratifying for me and for Intelligentsia to be part of, because we felt like we were growing the businesses together.
Yeah, that's really, really inspiring. And Jose, if you could, we have another question that talks about the need to educate different, whether it's your clients or the consumers. And so as you think about your relationship with Intelligentsia, you had this alignment of vision from the start, you built it over time, but I imagine you don't have that alignment with all your buyers, or maybe you do and you're super lucky. And but how do you as an organization of growers and exporting, educate and try to build that relationship with different buyers? Imagine you need multiple ones.
Well, something that I mentioned, and I mentioned specifically, when Michael visited us last year, like that we were traveling around without breakfast and without lunch. Remember, Michael? Like understanding the dynamics of the fields, to see what we can do, like to understand what is going on there. Like the same way happen on the export side. For the ones who don't know me, like I used to roast coffee in Chicago, and I used to like for a small roaster, and I used to buy some green coffee, and it was a headache, like buying some coffee from Peru or establish a relationship in Peru. And as a green buyer, I knew what I need as a green buyer. So when I came back, it was like, okay, what the green buyer needs, it needs quality, it needs like quick operations, it needs transparency, it needs like smooth communication, it needs a lot of different stuff, like collaborations, like separating the quality tiers, like consistency. So we start like offering that, and that is kind of like, even beside engagement of the same vision and the same the same goals and the same aim, everybody of us has the same north, like with all these other stuff that we do as OCL, because at the end we are a facilitator, like on the fields. So I want to talk about a little bit also with two customers that I have in Vancouver, in the British Columbia. Like they buy coffee from very specific producers, that these producers start producing coffee in August through November. So we have the forward contracts. We finance the contract with Root Capital. So we give in advance like 70 or 60% of the financing to these producers, because we have a long-term trust relationship with them, and also with the roasters. And in November, kind of, these roasters asked me like, hey, can you put on a spreadsheet, or can you send me a report of what coffees like these guys delivered this year? And they just take it all. They never ask for samples. They never ask for for quality reports, or they just ask for ship to me all their coffee. and that I think is great for both sides of the supply chain. I think that is like I just finished the spreadsheet yesterday, and it's like they are taking the blender, they are taking the micro lot. If they are producing geisha, it's like, do you have any Asian who wants the geisha? If not, just ship it to me. Like they don't like they have a lot of range of like price deciding. They're very commitment in the experimentation. Their varieties like and what happened is a lot of roasters, they are like, oh, what coffee did you ship to these guys? I want the same coffee. So that is a success in a relationship. And yeah, they don't visit during the season. They just visit like when it's no season to have more time and to hang out with the people. And yeah, I think like that kind of relationships, I think, are the ones that we need. Is are truly like built on trust and communication and transparency. As I said, transparency is not only a price to show. Transparency is like a smooth communication and valuable communication and information in both sides of the supply chain.
Yeah, that comes across very loud and clear from both of you. We just have left. There's one question here on a sort of practical tools around long-term commitment and price stability. Do you see multi-year contracts as the best solution? You both talked about the goal is good and stable prices over the long term. Does that translate into multi-year contracts for the Intelligentsia origin relationship, or is it more about the trust relationship and the contract is just the mechanism you? Maybe Michael, to you.
Yeah, we haven't done multi-year contracts, but there's never a question that there's going to be business done. It's just trying to align with José and Origin on the time frame as they're in their cycle, their annual sort of planning cycle, and when it's time for them to go out and lock up credit for the harvest, making sure that we're supporting that with contracts. I think I mean, I've seen it work both ways, doing multi-year contracts and also just, Intelligentsia has, to its great credit, built a reputation for long-term relationships. When I was there, we started tracking these two metrics that we called DT5 and DT10. It was the percentage of volume in relationships at least 5 years old and then at least 10 years old, and just trying to make that explicit. And the numbers were extraordinary, like over 85% was 5 years or longer. And anybody who wasn't at 5 years was someone who was on their way there, because to the Tinder match thing, we were only interested in long-term relationships. There wasn't a whole lot of, shorter term time horizons. And so I think we weren't really pressed in a lot of cases to do multi-year contracts because our reputation preceded us. And then everything that we were doing, like in the context of a relationship, was, talking about multi-year things and just setting contracts in place each year against a fixed pricing model. That's not to say that's the best way to go. Like, certainly we have also done, and I know lots of other people doing, multi-year contracts just to build in that stability and formalize what we've been doing, what Intelligentsia has been doing for a long time in a de facto way, which is making long-term commitments and year-over-year purchases. Because ultimately, I mean, I've been focused on the risk at origin, but also, the risk that you face as a buyer of inconstant supply and getting deliveries that don't match offers or don't match your quality specs. It's sort of like when you find someone who's demonstrated their ability to do that, every incentive is to lock that in and to double down on that and just to expand the commitment. It's always less expensive to retain a current customer than to get a new one, and the same thing goes for suppliers.
Yeah. I think we're going to have to leave it there. Both of you are brilliant. Thank you both. And I think we have a lot to take from this. I think stay in your marriages, build them well, invest the time, and best of luck also to you, Michael, in your new endeavors. And thank you, Jose, for sharing your experience. And I'm going to hand it back to you, Andres.
Thank you, Stephanie. Really appreciate your facilitation of this dialogue. Gracias, Jose, and Michael, for your insights and this very insightful conversation. And I'm closing the day. Thanks everyone for joining us today in this first day and agenda for the Green Coffee Summit 2023. Hope you enjoyed all the lecture, the panels, and presentation. And as you reflect on the topics covered today, please consider joining us tomorrow. We will keep exploring on practical innovations that continue to shift narratives of specialty green coffee production from discovering value to intentionally design it. And on day 2 of the Green Coffee Summit 2023, tomorrow, we will expand the learning topics by including green coffee breeding and genetic footprinting, due diligence legislation that raised the bar on coffee sustainability, specialty coffee actions, and the use of the SCA-CBA in trading contracts. Thanks a lot. And before leaving, I want to thank our sponsor, the Green Coffee Summit 2023. A free-to-attend virtual summit is made possible thanks to our title sponsor, Barista Attitude, and supporting sponsor BWT, Water and More, and Caravella Coffee. Thanks for your support and looking forward to keep this conversation evolving tomorrow. Thanks all.